Seabreeze Hills was a calm little coastal town where salty air drifted over sandy beaches and rolling waves. People often said that the gentle breeze carried secrets from the ocean, whispering ancient tales in the ear of anyone willing to listen. If you walk near the water in the early morning, you might smell the sweet blend of salt and blooming flowers, making the town feel both peaceful and enchanting. Yet, beneath this cozy surface, an odd story was unfolding. At the heart of Seabreeze Hills stood the Seabreeze Memorial Cemetery, a place meant to honor those who had passed on. This old graveyard was filled with rows of headstones, some brand new, others worn by wind, rain, and time. A few of the stones were so old that the names had faded, their letters swallowed by years of weather. But even with all its history, the cemetery seemed quiet and humble, watching over the final resting places of the town's ancestors and neighbors. In this resting place, Rex, a retired German Shepherd police dog, found his second home. Rex had once served on the K-9 unit of the local police force. During his active duty, Rex had sniffed out hidden clues, chased down suspects, and protected his human partners. Time had turned his muzzle a bit gray, but his senses and instincts were still sharp. He was still strong, brave, and always eager to help. Now that Rex was retired, Frank Harris, the cemetery's gentle and dedicated groundskeeper, had welcomed the dog into his life. Frank was a tall, thin man with deep wrinkles on his forehead and strong, calloused hands from years of working outdoors. He had tended to the cemetery for 15 years, trimming grass, planting flowers, and making sure every gravestone remained neat. He took a quiet pride in keeping the place looking peaceful and respectful. Most mornings, Frank would find Rex already awake, walking calmly among the headstones. At sunrise, the dog would patrol each row and corner, guided by his nose and memories of long police shifts. Frank found comfort in Rex's watchful nature because it meant no trouble, like thieves or vandals, would go unnoticed. The people of Seabreeze Hills got used to seeing Rex, his fur turned silver at the edges, methodically checking each grave. Many felt a quiet peace watching the loyal dog at work, even if they didn't understand exactly why he took his job so seriously. But one October morning, the easy routine changed. When Frank arrived, he saw Rex standing like a statue in front of a new headstone that bore the name Michael Sanders. The dog's bark echoed across the silent graves. It was not a casual woof or a friendly greeting. It was a desperate, urgent bark that seemed to signal something was wrong. Rex kept clawing at the ground, dragging his paws over the soil. Dirt scattered in every direction, and his paws began to wear and bleed. Nothing Frank did could calm Rex down. Alarmed, Frank flipped open his maintenance log. He went through page after page of records, scanning the times and dates of every burial and funeral service that had taken place in the last month. Yet he found no mention of a Michael Sanders being buried here recently. The headstone was brand new, but Frank had not authorized it, and there had been no recent funeral listed for that name. This made no sense. Frank knew every plot in this cemetery, and he was sure no fresh burial was scheduled in that spot. Just then, Officer Emily Carter, a newly trained police officer, walked in. Emily was young, with curious eyes and a confident stride. She had known Rex back when they were both in police training, so she was one of the few people he trusted completely. She often brought him treats and made sure to visit him on her days off. Emily sensed something out of the ordinary right away. She saw how frantic and upset Rex was around that one grave, his bark growing louder as if shouting for help. She felt her police instincts tingling, the same feeling she got when something big was about to happen. Emily and Frank tried to calm Rex, but he simply refused to stop digging at the fresh, soft earth. "This grave was not here a few days ago," Frank said in a trembling voice. "My records say this plot was empty. We haven't had any new burials in this area for at least a few weeks." The date on the headstone also didn't match anything official. Emily, now on high alert, radioed Sergeant Robert Matthews, respected, older member of the local police department, and told him about the suspicious headstone, the frantic dog, and the strange lack of records. Meanwhile, Rex kept at it with a determination that surprised everyone. He seemed to be warning them of something hidden underground. Even as his paws started to bleed, he would not back away. The stress in the air felt thicker as the morning fog lifted, revealing the carved name on the stone more clearly. Who was Michael Sanders? Why was Rex so certain something was wrong? By the time Sergeant Matthews arrived, the sun was climbing in the sky, and the cemetery was unusually cold for October. The bark of the German shepherd still echoed, and a prickly feeling spread through everyone who witnessed the dog's intense focus. Sergeant Matthews knelt down, touched the headstone, and noticed how new and well-made it was. "This is not some random prank," he muttered, looking worried. Frank and Emily told the sergeant about the missing records. Sergeant Matthews decided they needed an emergency exhumation order to unearth the coffin and see what was really buried there. This was not a decision to be made lightly, but Rex's reaction, plus the brand new stone that appeared without permission, was enough to convince him. Until the legal paperwork was rushed through, they put a barrier around the suspicious grave to keep people away. While the official wheels turned, other odd happenings took place. Frank saw a black sedan with tinted windows drive slowly by the gates of the cemetery 3 times in one afternoon. Each time, it seemed to linger, as if someone inside was watching them. Emily tried to spot a license plate or a driver's face, but it was too far away to see any details. Soon after, during one of his routine checks, Frank discovered a piece of raw meat near the strange grave. It was placed in a spot that seemed intentional, maybe to lure Rex away or poison him. Frank bagged it carefully, showing it to Emily. Her expression turned grim, and she placed her hand on her holster. "Someone wants to silence Rex," she whispered. Afraid for Rex's safety, they decided to hide him in the old chapel on the far edge of the cemetery. This chapel was mostly out of use, except for occasional storerooms. Its walls were solid, and there were only a few windows. Emily and Frank believed it would be safer for Rex there, away from prying eyes or the potential danger of a second attempt to poison him. Rex was reluctant to leave his post at first, but when Emily guided him, he followed, whining softly as they moved away from the suspicious grave. That night, Emily stayed by Rex's side in the dusty chapel, while Frank kept watch from his office. They had a strange feeling that this situation was bigger than it seemed. The hours ticked by slowly. Emily sat on an old wooden bench, reviewing official notes and trying to keep Rex calm. Every little sound outside made her flinch. She couldn't get the black sedan out of her mind, nor the raw meat or the sense of danger that hung over them like a dark cloud. Felt her heart lurch. Something crucial was hidden in that coffin, and Rex wanted them to find it right away. When the team slowly lifted the casket's lid, a wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. Inside the coffin lay a young man, bound and gagged, but still alive. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, yet he had a pulse. At once, paramedics rushed forward, carrying him to a waiting ambulance. His heartbeat was faint, but it was there, and that small sign of life filled everyone with a surge of hope and astonishment. The name on the headstone, Michael Sanders, matched the driver's license found in the young man's pocket. He was about 20 years old. No one could guess how he had ended up buried alive in a fancy casket under a false headstone. But if it wasn't for Rex's persistent barking and digging, Michael might have suffocated or starved underground. The crowd, neighbors, groundskeepers, and police stared in stunned silence, the air buzzing with the intensity of the moment. Rex had literally saved a life. But that was not all. After they removed Michael from the coffin, Rex's nose led him to a corner of the casket's interior. The dog was sniffing and scratching at the lining, whining more and more. Emily, not about to question Rex's instincts, carefully reached behind the loose fabric. What she found was a small, sealed flash drive, wrapped in plastic to keep it safe from dirt and moisture. Emily recognized the seriousness of this discovery right away. Flash drives often hold information, sometimes even evidence, in hidden compartments. She placed it in an evidence bag and handed it to Sergeant Matthews, who locked it in a secure box to give to the forensics unit. No one knew yet what was on it, but they had a feeling it might explain why someone had tried to get rid of Michael Sanders in such a shocking manner. Meanwhile, the black sedan that had circled the cemetery made another appearance. This time, Emily spotted it parked on the street across from the cemetery entrance. As soon as the driver realized they had been seen, the car sped off. Emily's mind raced with questions. Who was in that car? Were they the ones who buried Michael? Were they watching to make sure he never got found? Frank, normally calm, was now rubbing his temples in worry. This was more than any of them had expected. It wasn't every day you dug up a grave to find a living person and a hidden flash drive. The paramedics and police escorts rushed Michael to the hospital, giving him oxygen and in 4 drip along the way, hoping to stabilize him. Rex, exhausted but still on high alert, followed with anxious eyes as the ambulance pulled away. The day grew busier as more police cars arrived. Crime scene tape surrounded the grave, and the story quickly spread through Seabreeze Hills. Many residents hurried over, struggling to believe the wild rumors that flew around. But police kept them outside the cemetery gates, not wanting to compromise evidence or disrupt the investigation. Emily and Sergeant Matthews stayed behind to secure and catalog the discovered coffin, the headstone, and the disturbed earth. Every inch of soil was examined, and every piece of evidence was photographed. Rex kept pacing, even though he was limping and clearly in discomfort. When Emily approached, he let her bandage his paws with fresh gauze, but he never let his guard down, showing the same discipline he had as a police dog. That afternoon, Emily's phone rang. It was a call from the cyber forensics unit. The flash drive had been examined, and it contained encrypted files. Even the lead computer expert was impressed at the level of coding. It would take time to crack, but they were sure something big was hidden in that data. Emily's heart hammered with curiosity. Why would a young man be buried alive with a flash drive full of secret information? Meanwhile, a couple of officers went to the hospital to check on Michael. There, they learned that Michael Sanders was in critical condition but stable. He was sedated and on multiple drips, and the doctors were not sure when he might wake up, if at all. They believed he had suffered from lack of air, dehydration, and shock. If they had not found him when they did, he would have died. Back at the cemetery, Frank discovered something new. While going through his records, he found no official note about the coffin's delivery. He checked with local funeral homes. None had scheduled a service for anyone named Michael Sanders. Frank paced back and forth, feeling uneasy. He'd never had a missing log entry before, and it felt like some outside group had staged this entire event under everyone's noses. The night had not yet come, but the sun was already lowering in the sky, painting the horizon with reds and oranges. Emily and Sergeant Matthews sat in Frank's tiny office, going over the day's findings. They kept the door closed, trying to keep the conversation private in case that black sedan returned. Rex curled up near Emily's feet, glancing at her from time to time with knowing eyes. "We need to figure out who is behind this," said Sergeant Matthews. "The flash drive and that custom coffin, this isn't some random crime. It's organized. And the fact that they tried to kill a police dog to cover their tracks makes me think there's much more at stake." Emily nodded. No funeral records, a brand new headstone, an expensive casket, a living person inside. None of it is normal. If we can decode what's on that flash drive, we might uncover the reason Michael Sanders was targeted, and maybe we'll figure out who's watching us from that black sedan. Frank tapped the side of his old desk, thinking, "I'm worried. If these people are willing to bury someone alive, who knows what else they'll do? And I think they may still be watching us. I saw that car again this morning, and it really seemed like they were on the lookout." Rex let out a soft growl, as though agreeing. The dog's intuition always alerted him to danger, and Emily had learned to trust his instincts during their training. Tonight, they would have to be extra careful. The following day, Emily went back to the hospital to see if Michael Sanders had improved. She wanted to see if he might be able to talk, but the doctors said he was still unconscious. His father, Edward Sanders, had flown in on a private helicopter late the night before. Edward was an older man with a stern, businesslike presence. He ran a large digital security company, famous nationwide for its anti-hacking software. Some said he was a genius inventor who once worked secretly with government agencies. Edward Sanders stood near Michael's hospital bed, his face etched with worry. "They told me everything," he said, turning to Emily. "I need to know who did this to my son. I can offer resources, people, technology, anything you need." Emily felt a pang of sympathy. Although she wasn't sure what was on that flash drive, seeing a worried parent reminded her that, At its core, this was a story about a family shattered by a terrible crime. Meanwhile, the cyberforensics unit had made some progress in cracking the files from the flash drive. They discovered references to something called Ghost Protocol and an organization known as the Invisibles. Emily and Sergeant Matthews had never heard of such a group. The file seemed to describe a plan to access and manipulate very big computer systems, possibly including global bank networks. The technical details were beyond Emily's full understanding, but it looked serious enough to involve multiple government agencies. Sergeant Matthews began coordinating with higher-ups, who ordered special surveillance of Seabreeze Hills. More unmarked cars started patrolling near the cemetery, scanning for any suspicious vehicles. They found a black sedan in traffic camera footage, but the license plates seemed to be stolen. A wave of unease spread over the police force. They were dealing with experts who knew how to cover their tracks. Back in the cemetery, Frank did his best to maintain a normal routine, repairing broken fences, trimming hedges, and guiding visitors. But a sense of tension clung to him, like a shadow. He kept noticing more strange cars passing by the gates, sometimes even at odd hours. The new cameras he had installed, originally just for record-keeping, now helped keep track of these suspicious drive-bys. Rex, fully bandaged and limping less, resumed his patrols around the headstones. He visited every nook and cranny of the graveyard, sniffing the soil and the air. One afternoon, he became especially fixated on the western section of the cemetery, near an old maintenance shed. He circled the shed, sniffed at the door, and scratched at its latch. Curious, Frank joined him. Inside, they found footprints that didn't match any of Frank's usual boots. Also, some of the older tools were out of place, as if someone had been rummaging through the shed. Frank felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't noticed these changes, because he rarely used the older part of the shed. The footprint seemed fresh, formed after recent rain but dry around the edges. When Emily arrived to check on the day's events, Frank led her to the shed. She snapped photos of the footprints, then measured them against standard police references. She also discovered a tiny piece of black fabric on a nail near the door. None of it was conclusive evidence, but confirmed that someone sneaked into the cemetery at odd hours. And they had an interest in the older maintenance equipment. That same afternoon, Emily received a short text message from an unknown number. "Back off, or the dog won't be so lucky next time." Her blood ran cold. Who would threaten Rex directly? She showed the phone to Sergeant Matthews. He frowned, wrinkles forming on his brow. "We'll increase security around Frank and Rex," he said firmly. "But we also have to keep pushing forward. We can't be intimidated." Days passed. The doctors reported that Michael Sanders was awake, but still weak. He whispered to Emily and the nurse, mentioning something called Ghost Protocol and the Invisibles, linking them to a giant plan involving major banking systems. Edward Sanders, meanwhile, demanded tighter security at the hospital, fearing another attempt on Michael's life. The cyberforensics unit uncovered more from the flash drive. It wasn't only about hacking. There were also blueprints of underground cabling systems throughout Seabreeze Hills, highlighting fiber optic lines that ran under the town streets. From these documents, it seemed Seabreeze Hills was not chosen by random. The data lines beneath the Seabreeze Memorial Cemetery were a key junction that handled massive amounts of digital traffic. Emily and Sergeant Matthews pored over these new details, and they realized that the fake grave might have been set up in that very spot to tap into the underground fiber cables. If the Invisibles wanted to break into or control large global financial networks, they needed a strong place to intercept signals. The cemetery was perfect, especially because it was quiet, rarely guarded, and held its own labyrinth of older tunnels and storage areas. Frank, overhearing the conversation, said, "Yes, there's some very old tunnels here. I've come across a few while doing maintenance, but most of them were sealed off decades ago. They might date back to the time when the cemetery was first built, over 100 years ago. The older groundskeepers used them for water drainage or moving supplies without disturbing funeral services." This was crucial information. Emily asked Frank if he had any records about those tunnels. He rummaged through his dusty office drawers and found yellowed blueprints left by a previous groundskeeper. These blueprints showed a complex network of underground passageways that linked different areas of the cemetery. Some even extended under nearby streets, connecting to the city's deeper utility lines. That Rex's unusual interest in the Western maintenance shed made sense now. Perhaps he smelled human activity in places long since abandoned or sealed off. "We need to search every corner of these tunnels," Emily announced. "If the Invisibles are using these hidden paths, we must find out how they're doing it." Sergeant Matthews arranged for a small team of officers and a few city engineers to help. When they pried open an iron gate behind the old shed, they discovered a damp corridor that sloped downward. The walls were made of crumbling bricks, lined with old pipes. The air smelled of moss and stale water. Rex stood at the entrance, his ears perked up and tail stiff, ready to lead. The group proceeded cautiously, flashlights lighting the way. They found side passages that branched off to other lock gates. Some were rusted shut. Others had brand new locks, which was peculiar, suggesting recent activity. Rex sniffed each path, but he seemed drawn to one deeper route that led toward the main part of the cemetery. Down this tunnel, the group noticed modern footprints in the dust and even some scattered cable ties, items that definitely did not belong to a century-old corridor. Emily snapped photos, her heart racing at the idea that they were closing in on something big. Sergeant Matthews directed the group to mark each path on a map so they wouldn't get lost. At one point, Rex stopped, growling softly. Ahead, they could hear faint voices echoing through the darkness. Flashlights switched off. The group pressed against the damp walls, straining to listen. It sounded like people talking about data uploads, times, and the word midnight. Whoever was speaking had an urgent tone, as if finalizing a secret plan. Emily's pulse quickened. She motioned for everyone to stay silent, but just then, one of the officers accidentally stepped on loose gravel, sending a small scattering sound down the tunnel. The voices stopped instantly. Footsteps scrambled in the distance. By the time the group advanced with their flashlights, they found no one. The place where the unknown speakers had been was empty, except for some coffee cups and a newly installed metal door. It was locked. The urgent footsteps had vanished deeper into the network of tunnels, or perhaps out another exit. "This is bigger than we thought," Sergeant Matthews said, eyeing the locked door. "We need better resources to break through. And if these tunnels reach the city's main data lines, there's no telling what they've already set up." Rex sniffed around the area, picking up fresh scents. He pawed at the door and whined, as though warning them that whatever was inside was important. They had discovered proof that criminals were using the old cemetery tunnels, but they still didn't know the entire plan, and they hadn't found where the cables or computer equipment might be hidden. With tension and excitement swirling, they decided to head back, gather better tools, and get specialists who could handle advanced locks and possible booby traps. The underground labyrinth was now the center of their investigation. Yet in Emily's mind, one main question remained. Where did this all lead? And what did it have to do with burying Michael Sanders alive? When Emily emerged from the dark tunnel and breathed in the fresh afternoon air again, she felt both relief and pressure. The sun was setting over Seabreeze Hills, casting long shadows across the peaceful cemetery. It was hard to believe such a sinister secret lay beneath this serene place. While heading back to Frank's office, Rex still seemed restless. The dog often looked over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to jump out from the bushes. Emily gave his ears a reassuring rub. "You're okay, boy," she whispered. "We'll figure this out." Inside the office, Frank had a surprise waiting. "I was reviewing old photos I took for maintenance. Look at these." He spread out several pictures on his desk. They showed people lurking around at odd times, mostly at night. Frank had set up a basic camera to document any vandalism or damage. Normally, it was just teenagers sneaking around, but in the last month, there were new faces, always wearing dark clothes and hats pulled low. They appeared to be taking measurements of certain headstones or ground patches. Emily noted the times and dates. The men or women in the photos moved systematically around the cemetery, especially near the area they had just explored. One picture caught Emily's eye. It showed a person standing exactly where they found Michael Sanders' false grave. That picture had been taken about 3 days before the discovery. That meant the headstone and coffin were planted recently, part of a larger plan to hide or store something. Maybe that flash drive, or maybe to keep Michael from talking. A knock on the door revealed Officer Emily's old partner from the training academy, a woman named Sophia Tran. She was an expert in data analysis. She arrived with a laptop loaded with more findings from the flash drive. As soon as she saw Frank's pictures, she nodded. Some of these faces match partial images we found online. We suspect they're affiliated with that group, the Invisibles. They're known for high-level hacking and infiltration. We think their plan is to break into global financial networks. Sergeant Matthews, also in the office, looked grave. They must have discovered that Michael Sanders was working on a new security system for his father's company. Maybe they kidnapped him, tried to force him to hand over crucial codes, then decided to get rid of him. But they had no idea Rex would sniff him out. Everyone exchanged concerned glances. The more they discovered, the more dangerous it seemed. If these people were skilled enough to bury a living person near major data lines, they could do even worse. Frank quietly locked the office door. He was worried about eavesdroppers. He felt chills down his spine. He'd always thought of himself as a simple groundskeeper, never expecting to be tangled up in a plot involving hidden tunnels and hacking groups. Rex's ears twitched. He moved to the window and growled. Frank flipped off the office light, and they carefully peeked outside. Another unfamiliar car, this one white, rolled slowly by the gate. Its windows were too dark to see inside. Emily quickly memorized the license plate. She had a feeling it might be another stolen or fake plate, just like the black sedan. "Let's secure the area," Sergeant Matthews ordered. "Tomorrow, we're going back into those tunnels with a full team. We'll bring engineers, more officers, and maybe some city officials. We can't let these criminals keep their foothold here." Emily nodded. She squatted down to check Rex's bandages. They were a bit dirty from the tunnel dust, but still holding. She remembered how the dog had bravely chased suspects and sniffed out contraband during his active days. Even now, older and retired, Rex continued to protect and serve. She felt proud to work alongside him. Early next morning, the sky was foggy, making the graveyard look even more mysterious. True to their plan, a larger team arrived. Extra police officers, a city engineer, and 2 experts in security systems. They intended to figure out how the Invisibles connected equipment to the city's fiber optic lines from inside the cemetery. Frank led the group to the old chapel. Beneath it was a basement that had been out of use for a long time. Some believed the basement was once a small crypt or storage room. Others said it was simply a workshop. Over the decades, it had been sealed, reopened, then sealed again. Now, it seemed likely that part of the secret tunnels might intersect that basement. The heavy wooden doors of the chapel creaked as they opened. Dust motes floated in the cold air. Rows of old pews stood under colorful stained glass windows that depicted serene scenes of angels and crosses. While it might have been a quiet place for prayer in the past, it now felt like they were stepping into a puzzle box full of secrets. To confirm, Emily and Sergeant Matthews set up a small sting operation. They placed false information about a supposed next step in the cemetery tunnels on a hidden part of the police server. Within hours, that same info showed up in the logs under the chapel. Someone had passed it along. The trail led back to Riley's computer. They had their mole. However, when Emily and a team went to arrest Riley at his apartment, they found him unconscious on the floor. A half-empty vial of some drug was found next to him. By the time paramedics arrived, Riley was barely breathing. He eventually woke up in the hospital and claimed he had no idea how he ended up like that, though he admitted someone paid him to leak some harmless bits of information. He said he had no idea they were planning a global attack. Before he could say more, doctors sedated him again to stabilize his heart. Now, the only lead they had was gone. The Invisibles had cut ties by silencing Riley. With Riley out of commission, the threat level rose. The time on the stolen server's log suggested that the Invisibles planned to make their main move at midnight, only a few days away. Edward Sanders feared that if they gained control of his company's AI security system, they could perform digital thefts that wouldn't be detected until much later, possibly plunging global markets into chaos. Emily, Sergeant Matthews, Frank, and Rex gathered in the Chapelturn Command Center to share updates. They used Frank's office less now, worried it might be bugged. Michael, though still weak, called in from a hospital via a secure line to offer tips on disabling certain parts of the AI system if they could access them physically. Rex paced around, restless. His nose twitched at every open door, every passing breeze. Emily knew that look. He sensed danger was coming soon. It made her think about how, just a short while ago, Rex had barked like a madman at an unmarked grave. That was the beginning of everything. Now they stood at the edge of a possible global disaster. Sergeant Matthews assigned teams to cover different tunnel entrances around the cemetery. They also posted watchers at the hospital, in case the Invisibles tried one last time to silence Michael. The black sedan and other suspicious cars had vanished, which worried Emily. She suspected they were preparing for their final move. During one of his routine checks, Frank found more tampering around the maintenance shed, a battered lock, scattered footprints, and a newly drilled hole in the ground. He recognized this as an attempt to hook into the cables from another angle. He quickly reported it. Tech experts rushed in to verify it was part of the same large fiber line. The clock felt like it was moving too quickly. Each day blurred into the next. Despite their best efforts, the police had trouble sealing every exit in the labyrinth of tunnels. They realized the Invisibles had spent months, maybe years, turning the old cemetery network into a hidden fortress. It was both terrifying and impressive how much effort went unnoticed in this quiet town. Finally, the day before midnight, Emily gathered with the top investigation team to plan their infiltration of the largest part of the hidden system, the place they believed the criminals would show up to trigger the final sequence of hacking. They guessed it was somewhere at a deeper point under the cemetery, close to the fiber-optic trunk lines. Michael's data gave them a rough idea, pointing to an unused crypt near the oldest section of the grounds. Night fell across Seabreeze Hills, blanketing the cemetery in a dark calm. The moonlight gave the headstones eerie, elongated shadows. A hush fell over the old chapel, where Emily, Sergeant Matthews, Frank, Rex, and a carefully chosen group of officers prepared to make their move. They wore dark clothing and carried minimal gear to stay light and quiet. The plan was to take the Invisibles by surprise in their main lair. Rex took the lead again. Despite his healing paws, the dog refused to be left behind. They navigated through a hidden door behind the chapel's altar, down the same route they had found earlier. This time, they knew exactly which corridor to follow. They reached the steel door leading to the data center, but it was propped open, as though inviting them in. The large room beyond was mostly dark. The glow of computer screens revealed rows of powerful servers, cables snaking across the floor. The monitors showed countdown timers, 01:15, 01:14, 01:13. The system was set to start an automated process in just over an hour, very close to midnight. Suddenly, voices echoed from the opposite side of the room. Several figures, wearing dark hooded gear, were hunched over a console. At least two of them had guns. Emily quickly signaled everyone to take cover behind server racks. A tall figure at the main console spoke in a calm, icy tone. "Keep working. We have to integrate the last of the code. Once the clock hits 0, the infiltration will begin." They typed rapidly on a keyboard while another person watched a screen that displayed world currency prices. The dog let out a low growl, barely audible. Emily placed a hand on Rex's back, silently telling him to hold. Sergeant Matthews prepared the group for a quick takedown. But first, they needed to disable the criminals' tech so the final hack wouldn't launch. Michael had explained that physically disconnecting certain cables would stop the program unless the hackers had a backup system running. Emily scanned the room for the cables, noticing a big junction box on the far wall, near the criminals. At a quiet signal, the officers sprang into action. Rex lunged forward, barking fiercely, startling the hackers. Emily and Sergeant Matthews rushed the console. A chaotic scene unfolded as the hooded figures grabbed their weapons, only to be disarmed by skilled officers who had the element of surprise. For a few tense moments, the room was full of shouts and the sound of scuffling feet. Rex tackled one suspect who tried to flee with a laptop. Another suspect tried to shoot at the dog, but Sergeant Matthews knocked him down with a swift move. Emily spotted a third criminal trying to pull a lever on the big junction box. She sprinted across the room, tackling the person before they could throw the switch. The countdown continued to blink. 00:59. 00:58. Breathing heavily, Emily and the team secured the suspects with handcuffs. Some tried to resist, but the well-trained officers overpowered them. One of the hackers, a middle-aged woman with intense eyes, snarled, "You think you've won? We have a second base. The infiltration will still happen." She refused to say more, only spitting at Emily's feet. Meanwhile, Frank, safe behind the group, rushed to the main console and tried to remember what Michael had told them. He carefully shut down the main system, yanking out cables exactly as instructed. The screens flickered, then went dark. The big timer froze at 0:56, no longer counting down. It seemed like a victory, until Rex started barking at a second door, the one they had not come through. Emily's heart tightened. If there was another exit, maybe part of the plan was continuing somewhere else. She told 2 officers to take the captured suspects outside, while the rest followed Rex to the second doorway, which led to a narrow tunnel sloping down. The corridor was humid and stale, with the same modern cables pinned to the walls. The group edged forward, hearts pounding. Rex sniffed the ground, letting out soft barks here and there. It felt like something far more dangerous waited ahead. The tunnel opened into a smaller chamber that held a single large computer rack. The screen displayed the same countdown, but it was still ticking. 00:52, 00:51, 00:50. This was a backup system. If it reached 0, the hacker's plan might still go live. Next to the device stood a trembling figure, Frank, or at least it looked like him at first glance. But as the flashlight swung over, they realized it was not Frank, but a masked person wearing a hat similar to Frank's. The real Frank was with them. Behind that masked person was a second hostage. The real Frank? No, they saw Frank standing there. Confusion washed over them. Then the lights flickered, and they saw the hostage was someone else from their team, possibly an engineer forced to keep the system running. Shaking his head, Frank recognized the engineer from City Hall, someone who had vanished a week ago. The man had sweat dripping down his face, mechanical tools at his feet. He stared at the newly arrived officers, desperate for help. The masked person hissed, "One step closer, and he's done for. I'll trigger this system right now if you don't back off." The muzzle of a pistol was pressed against the engineer's temple. Emily, Sergeant Matthews, Frank, and Rex froze. The countdown was down to 0:49. They had only minutes. If the masked criminal pressed a few keys, the infiltration would begin, and the unstoppable hack could cause catastrophic damage. Yet a life was on the line. Sergeant Matthews tried to reason. "There's no escape. Your team is caught. The police have the entire place surrounded. Surrender, and no one gets hurt." He spoke in a calm but urgent tone, hoping to defuse the standoff. The masked figure let out a bitter laugh. "You have no idea how big the Invisibles truly are. I'm just a cog in the machine." Then the figure yanked the engineer closer, forcing him to operate the console. A progress bar started moving across the main screen. 75%, 76%, 77%. Desperate, Emily shot a glance at Rex. The dog was locked on the masked figure, baring his teeth. But they had to be careful. One wrong move, and the engineer could be shot, or the hack would go live. Emily's mind raced, recalling every tactic she had learned. Suddenly, the masked figure was distracted by a frantic beep from the console. In that split second, Rex seized the moment, lunging across the chamber in a blur of fur and teeth. He clamped down on the criminal's arm, forcing them to drop the gun. The engineer scrambled to safety as Emily rushed in to grab the weapon, and Sergeant Matthews tackled the masked figure to the ground. Panting, Emily turned to the console. The bar read 98%, 99%. She jammed a flash drive that Michael had given her into a USB slot, hoping the failsafe tool would neutralize the code. For a few seconds, the system froze, stuck at 99%. Then, lines of text scrolled rapidly. The countdown flickered. 00:02, 00:01. Then Operation Halted flashed on the screen. The entire system powered down. Everyone exhaled in relief. The infiltration had been stopped with only seconds to spare. The masked figure struggled under Sergeant Matthews, but was swiftly cuffed, all the while shouting insults. The engineer was shaken but unhurt. Rex sat, tail wagging, yet alert, as though waiting to see if more threats remained. This time, there were no more doors to run through, no more backup systems. The main cables had been pulled. The system was offline. The Invisibles planned to use Seabreeze Hills, as their secret hacking center had failed. In the days that followed, the police finished securing every inch of the cemetery's hidden tunnels, padlocking or sealing entrances so no criminals could come back. Specialists carried away the advanced computers for further study, hoping to learn more about the Invisibles' global network. Michael Sanders, finally healed enough to leave the hospital, visited the cemetery to personally thank Rex. He brought a shiny new collar with a police badge attached, symbolizing gratitude for the dog who saved his life. Rex barked happily, accepting gentle pets from Michael, who had tears in his eyes. Edward Sanders was so moved by the dog's heroics that he donated a large sum of money to build a community veterinary center in Seabreeze Hills. The center would be named after Rex, offering free medical care to retired police dogs and service animals. Construction began almost immediately, and many residents praised the idea. Frank returned to his normal duties, relieved that the cemetery was peaceful again. He told visitors about how the old tunnels had been shut down and how a new set of security cameras would stop any more funny business. Each morning, Rex joined Frank for the daily round, sniffing the corners of the yard, from the false grave site where they had saved Michael to the old chapel, which had once hidden a secret base. Everything was back to being calm and quiet. Emily gained recognition for her bravery and quick thinking. She was promoted, and some news outlets even told the story of how she and Rex rescued a buried young man and prevented a massive financial crime. People admired the bond between a police officer and her loyal dog partner, reminding them that animals can be as heroic as any person. Sergeant Matthews, the city engineer, and other team members who had helped break the case were honored at a small-town ceremony. Mayor Robbins gave them medals for preventing a global disaster right in their hometown. Folks from neighboring towns showed up to celebrate the big victory over criminals who had foolishly thought they could hide in such a caring community. The black sedan and the other suspicious vehicles never returned. Investigators believed that most of the Invisibles had either fled the region or been arrested trying to leave the state. Federal authorities took over the broader case, using data from the seized computers to locate other bases tied to the Invisibles. Many arrests were made in different cities, and global financial institutions updated their security, thanks to the near miss at Seabreeze Hills. Through it all, Rex kept his watchful eye on the now restored cemetery. His paws healed nicely, and Frank spoiled him with treats. Families who visited loved to greet the brave German shepherd as they passed by. Children would ask if they could pet the dog that had uncovered the buried man. Rex's wagging tail told everyone that he was proud to accept their admiration. Eventually, the story turned into local legend. People spoke of how a retired police dog and a careful groundskeeper uncovered a hidden threat under the graves of Seabreeze Hills, one that could have impacted the whole world's financial stability. Teachers used the story to show kids how paying attention to details and trusting your instincts can save lives. Late in the afternoon, Frank would often sit near the chapel, taking in the quiet beauty of the headstones and flowers. Rex would lie beside him, ears perked, scanning the horizon. Together, they remembered the frenzied days of chasing criminals in dusty tunnels. Even after all that excitement, they stayed just as loyal to each other as the day they first met. With the new vet center nearing completion, many in town felt grateful that something good and lasting came from such a frightening event. Neighbors donated time or money to help build the center faster. They called it Rex's Haven, and everyone agreed it was the perfect tribute to the determined dog who wouldn't stop barking at a suspicious grave until he saved a life and unmasked a giant criminal scheme. On a bright summer morning, the center opened. Emily cut the ribbon with the mayor's assistance, while Rex stood next to her in a place of honor. Frank held the dog's leash, beaming with pride. Reporters took pictures, and townspeople applauded the four-legged hero. After the ceremony, people lined up to meet Rex, give him treats, and hear the story one more time. It was a happy day that showed how a town can come together, guided by the loyalty of one brave dog and the dedication of those who believed in him. Life in Seabreeze Hills gradually settled back into its usual calm. The ocean breeze still whispered through tall grass. Families still strolled along the beach, and the cemetery returned to its peaceful purpose. However, a new sense of pride filled the residents' hearts. They knew their hometown had stood up to a sophisticated group of criminals and won. The Seabreeze Memorial Cemetery itself became an unexpected tourist spot. People from neighboring areas wanted to see where the buried alive rescue happened, and they'd pose for photos by the now empty grave that once read Michael Sanders. A new marker had been set in place, explaining that no one was truly buried there, but a life had been saved by a dog's courage. Tourists found it both eerie and uplifting. Rex, once a police dog who faced retirement with uncertain prospects, had found a fresh mission protecting the cemetery and its visitors. He also became a symbol of loyalty and bravery. Many children in Seabreeze Hills, inspired by his story, said they wanted to become police officers or vets. School teachers regularly invited Emily and Rex to speak, teaching lessons about determination, honesty, and standing up to wrongdoing. Frank, as the faithful groundskeeper, felt his own life had changed forever. He had discovered an unexpected well of courage in himself when faced with danger. He also found that he had a knack for spotting small clues. This new confidence made him a local hero in his own right, and the folks he met at the cemetery listened with respect to his stories. Occasionally, he'd catch a glimpse of something suspicious, a stray cat or a raccoon rummaging around, but thankfully, no more criminals. Edward Sanders expanded his company's security efforts to ensure that no group like the Invisibles would succeed in such a plot again. He and Michael worked on advanced digital safeguards, combining artificial intelligence with human oversight. They included features that recognized unusual activity, like a sudden headstone that doesn't appear in the official records of a local cemetery. The lesson: big data is powerful, but so is the watchful eye of a caring community. The last known members of the Invisibles in the region were tried for kidnapping, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit cybercrime, and more. Each new piece of evidence from seized computers helped the authorities track down criminals in other countries. Lawsuits and trials stretched on, but the message was clear. They couldn't hide behind secret networks and false graves. They had run into a place where a loyal dog's bark carried more truth than any of their cunning plans. Every evening, as the sun set behind the rolling hills of Seabreeze, Frank would walk around the cemetery with Rex at his side. They passed new graves and ancient ones, each telling a piece of the town's history. Birds chirped in the surrounding oaks, and a gentle wind swayed the trees. The sight of the old chapel reminded them of those frantic days underground, discovering hidden cables and advanced computers. It felt like a tale from a spy novel, yet it had happened right here, in their quiet hometown. The next time you visit Seabreeze Hills, you might notice a statue near the front gate of the cemetery. It shows a German shepherd standing at alert, with a small plaque that reads, "Rex, our forever guardian. He warned us to listen." Every few weeks, you'll see fresh flowers at the statue's base, left by those who come to honor the dog, who made them pay attention to one impossible-sounding bark. In the end, the greatest lesson from Seabreeze Hills is that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Some wear badges and bulletproof vests. Others hold shovels and care for the land. And one might walk on four paws, barking at something everyone else overlooked. No matter how large and mysterious the threat, loyalty, hope, and cooperation can shine a light even in the darkest tunnels. This is why, years later, the townspeople still share the incredible story of the day a retired police dog named Rex saved a young man buried alive and helped protect the entire world's financial security. It reminds them that small towns, great hearts, and faithful dogs can stand tall against even the biggest storms, especially when they trust their instincts and each other. Dear friends, We hope you found Rex's story as heartwarming and exciting as the people of Seabreeze Hills did. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. We bring you special stories every day about the close bonds between humans and their faithful animal companions. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what part of Rex's journey inspired you the most. Check out our playlist on the left for more captivating stories about brave dogs, caring communities, and the amazing ways animals change our lives. Until our next adventure, always remember, true heroes can come with fur for paws and hearts made of gold. And when they bark, it might be important to pay attention.